You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel.
We present Tears of the Devil by John Fryer with Nigel Peaver, Richard Graylin, Jeff Bainham and Robin Ingram as the banker. The play is set in a fictional White House in the early years of the 21st century. Episode 2.
What are you saying, Mr. President?
That this whole operation is simply war for commercial interests.
Which particular commercial interests are we talking about?
The invasion of Iraq was discredited day after day as it became clear that contract after contract was given to companies and corporations with direct connection to the administration at that time. Rebuilding operations given again and again to the same limited few. People dying while others became even richer than they were before. A conflict so destroyed in value in the eyes of the world that books were written and films were made attacking the whole invasion before it even took place. I'm not ignorant of your connection to the energy industry, David. Need I say more?
That depends, Mr. President, whether or not you think you can.
Rebuilding contracts running into thousands of millions paid for by the American taxpayer. The population may well see the institution of government as the enemy and to get out of it what they can, but that should not be the thinking of those employed within its service.
Mr. President, look.
Carl, Secretary of State. How can you go along with this? I asked you to serve because I thought you were a man of honor. And now I find you standing on the side of the Hawks. You know this all stinks to high heaven. This country has been fed yet another conflict where the details are so vague that I read in the newspapers 62% of the people do not fully understand why we're even threatening war, let alone about to go and do it. Carl, just tell me why. You've always been a man of peace and compassion. Your children went to the same school as mine. They played together, grew up together. Your daughter even dated my son for a short while. Now, I feel like I don't know you. If I sign these attack orders, you know there'll be parents that will lose their children tonight. Children who will lose parents. There has to be a better solution than this. I'm asking you, Carl, now, at the 11th hour, help me. Those people in Damascus don't deserve to die. They don't have to. We don't have to kill them. This terrorist group, we can use special forces, work with the Syrian government, find a solution. This is wrong, Carl. This is not what we came to the White House for. We have to start living in the real world.
The real world?
Yes.
With respect, sir, you're the only one here that's far from living in the real world.
What?
This whole country has not lived in the real world, or at least not the world that the rest of the planet exists in for decades, Mr. President. You think, sir, that we march from country to country simply for the sheer hell of military conquest, or the thrill of private business dealings for those that back the political structure in this country? The structure that holds this nation together is so fragile and so illusionary that the public will only realize the fantasy they live in when one day, and this could be one day very soon, when they wake up and discover the country's no longer there. The history of this nation, of all nations, is the history of energy, Mr. President. From wind power to water to coal to oil, it is the consumption of power that has built every modern nation currently in existence. But lose that power, Mr. President, as you are suggesting tonight, because you think you're the only one here with moral objections, and you lose everything. And we stand on the verge of that.
So, where's next, Mr. Secretary? A slow crawl across the sands of the Middle East?
Not exactly, sir, no. We are only looking at countries that are in a position to make the cost of invasion viable.
And how do you propose to do that, Mr. Sterling?
Mr. President, I do not care what reports you have received from the Federal Reserve, the GAO, or the Treasury. Let me explain how delicate the economy is, that most of our people have come to rely on, when in fact it is little more than a carefully costed illusion.
I know the true figures of unemployment, but this is about oil.
This is not about who has a job and who doesn't. It's about which countries survive until the end of this century. It's as brutal as that. Without the oil, there is no United States of America.
I do not agree with you, Mr. Secretary.
Sir, the world, and I know this will not sound true to you, but it is, and I beg you to understand, stands on a knife point. We today face horrors the likes of which no one in the past has ever known.
Don't be dramatic, David. Previous generations fought wars, for Christ's sake.
Fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes,
So future generations could live in peace, right?
that's right.
And have you, sir, ever known 1 year since 1945 in which we haven't been fighting someone, somewhere, either openly or in private?
What's your point, David?
January 10th, 1901, at Spindletop, just outside Beaumont, Texas. 10:30, and Al Hamill, frustrated, steps away from his well and declares to his brother Kurt that there ain't no oil here. Then, from some 1,100 feet below, through the sandstone, there came a deafening roar. Methane gas was the first to be ejected from the hole. Then came, in a 6-inch wide column, a jet of brownish-green liquid. Hundreds of feet into the air did this pillar of shining energy rise. So high it was visible up to 4 miles away. People actually turned up just to look at the gushing tide rise above their heads and then fall down like rain from the heavens. Now, most wells at that time were lucky if they produced 50 to 100 barrels a day, but Spindletop was producing 5,000 barrels every hour. 100,000 barrels a day. More than the rest of the global production put together. From the 1850s, the stuff had been around, but never in such quantities. Now, it was more commercial, cleaner, and produced more energy than anything anyone had ever had before. Rapid industrialization came to depend on it as the main source of power for homes, factories, and office buildings. The world was lit no longer by gas lamps, but by the burning of that liquid from the ground. The world was finally illuminated, and King Coal had had its day. Now, after Spindletop, we were in the age of oil.
You should be in entertainment.
Following a meeting between King Ibn Saud and FDR in 1945, the Saudi Arabian Oil Company, or Aramco, was formed to keep the U.S. well-stocked with its favorite liquid. In fact, so great had become this country's demand for cheap power that by 1946 we had started to import oil. And by 1955, the USA was using 1/3 of all the energy across the planet, with car usage up to a staggering 48 million vehicles on the road. Independence for the upwardly mobile and the new toy for anyone with cash in their pockets. But there was a problem. OPEC was formed on September the 14th, 1960. 1962 was the year global oil production peaked. U.S. production peaked not long after that in 1970, and so when we backed Israel in 1973 in the Ramadan-Yom Kippur War, OPEC embargoed oil exports to the U.S. And this led to the oil crises, with prices rising by 400%. In 1975, the Kingdom of Saudi agreed to export their oil exclusively to Uncle Sam, and from then on, the dollar was backed not by gold, but by oil. It was the depositing of huge profits in New York and London by Arab countries with currencies they could not use that produced the idea of petrodollars, being recycled as loans and bonds to third world nations to pay for their own oil imports. After the interest rates went through the roof in the 80s, this led to the famines throughout Africa. Also, during the 70s and 80s, the Saudis began using petrodollars to purchase huge amounts of our weapons that they did not need and never used, with these sales becoming a hidden subsidy to our so-called Defense Department, which keeps millions of our fellow citizens employed. Again, all based on the economics of oil. But then, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution closed down Iran's oil fields, creating the largest price rises in history. 1989, and after 8 years of fighting between Iran and Iraq, the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein was desperate to increase revenue from his oil exports. In an effort to deprive Saddam from doing just that, Kuwait steps up oil production and floods the market with cheap oil, forcing the price down. Fearing armed conflict, the Saudis cut production and begged the other OPEC countries to do the same, but too late. Venezuela refused to play ball and actually stepped up production, and so did the United Arab Emirates. So price readjustment never really worked. During 1990, Saddam masses his forces along the Iraq-Kuwaiti border. On the 25th of July of that year, he meets U.S. Ambassador April Glaspie and asks for Washington's reaction to a Kuwaiti invasion, to which she replies that the U.S. wishes only to improve its relations with Iraq and has no opinion on their Arab-Arab conflicts. August the 2nd, and Iraqi troops step foot on Kuwaiti sand. And President Bush freezes Iraq's assets in America. The first war for oil had started.
The official line is that Saddam was not a very nice guy.
The major concern of governments around the world was now recession, with both Iraqi and Kuwaiti oil off the market, and we urged the Saudis to pump as much oil as possible. With Saddam's 3 million barrels a day off the world market, the other Arab countries jumped at upping their production and getting a piece of the action. And to keep his hands off Kuwaiti, and then it was believed Saudi Arabian oil next, the Arabs practically pulled us into the Middle East to protect them. 1991. And Iraq is out of Kuwait, and UN sanctions reduce Iraqi oil production to little more than 1 million barrels a day. And Saddam had to pay for US and UK warplanes to patrol the no-fly zones in the north and south of his country. 11% of the world's oil production was now off the market. His Arab brothers took up the shortfall, and we waited until we would need it. 2001. We enter Afghanistan, only to discover that the Caspian Sea contains a mere 40 billion barrels. Not the 200 billion we had been led to believe. We were truly disappointed that day. I can tell you, Mr. President, truly disappointed. 2003. We re-walk into Iraq. Now we need that oil. Now we have access to it.
I asked you what your point was.
Oil is the world, Mr. President. Oil is what we exist for. We eat oil. We consume oil. We excrete oil. We use oil to make our very lives possible. We are dependent on oil like nothing else in the world. Up to the discovery of oil, the population of this planet stood at 500 million. After the discovery of oil, and the benefits that we have developed on the back of it, the global population now stands at 7 billion, sir. All because of oil.
Go on.
Population growth echoes oil production, Mr. President.
In episode 2 of Tears of the Devil, Nigel Peaver was David Sterling, Richard Graylin was Carl Leach, and Jeff Bainham was President Townsend. Zach Benoit was the Syrian ambassador Ahmed Bakar, Mari King and Tony Plumridge were the TV reporters, and Robin Ingram was the banker. All other parts were played by members of the cast. Artwork for the series was by Sheila Jackson, and the series is written and directed by John Fryer. Tears of the Devil, Episode 2, is an audio production for Political Art.